Hi, Monarch Kids. This is Ms. Kurganin, and I am going to be going over urban patterns and urban models. And the first thing that we're going to do in your listening guide is we're actually going to look at the differences between Buckinghamshire in England versus Eagle, Idaho. And if you come in from Google Earth, and I'm going to have you guys do this in groups where you come in, look at Google Earth, and analyze the way that the city center is organized. What do you notice? And you'll go through this listening guide looking for these questions and how the land is organized. Analyze that European model to a very common US model. This is Eagle, Idaho. And already you notice like it's super boxy and linear versus this concentric layout. So what do you notice? We're going to spend about 15 minutes looking at patterns of urban land design. And then we're going to come back and look at these urban models. And the main three that we are analyzing today is we are analyzing the Hoyt model, the Burgess model, and the Harris-Ullman model. So take a second to talk about with your groups and then rejoin this video. So after you guys have done the introduction and looked at Buckinghamshire and you've looked at Eagle, Idaho, we're ready to check out these three models: concentric ring, sector model, and the multiple nuclei model. And this is definitely based in history and in transportation, but I find it fascinating the way that cities, urban centers have developed based on the transportation that was available to them. So we're going to be looking at where is the central business, the manufacturing designations, and where the residential people are living. So the first model, urban model that we're going to check out is called the Burgess concentric model. And this is a model that's based on Chicago back in the 1900s, and it reflects most US cities that are on the East Coast that have developed in concentric rings. So if you think about historically immigrants coming in and settling in the urban center, and then over generations are moving out towards the suburbs, these are cities that definitely represent like East Coast design. So in our land use and the way that this is all designated, you've got the central business district here. Right around in a ring around the central business district is where you have the manufacturing. So if you think back to like Boston, and right around are the textile mills. And then beyond that are the residential. And that's lower class residential because they are feeding right into the workforce that's working in these manufacturing centers. Now, where are the rich people living? Well, a little bit out of the city. So middle class residential is on the outer edges, and then the most exclusive residential are on the outer. So where then would be super industrial parks or heavy industry and like the places that you don't want to live near because of the noise and the pollution, that's going to be like even beyond these concentric zones. So Burgess noticed that Boston was laid out this way, that Philadelphia was laid out this way, that Chicago in the early years was laid out this way, that this was the way that the city was developing, and that in each generation, like if you think of working class, new immigrants living here, and then as they get a little bit of money in the next generation, they're going to move to the middle class. And then the next generation, maybe they're going to move to the most exclusive residential neighborhoods, that this is a model that shows our upward mobility and that American dream. And so definitely East Coast cities have developed in this model. Now, there is some benefits and some drawbacks to this model. This one is definitely focused on immigration, and that each new immigrant group as it comes into the city is being kind of overtaken, and that there's this new dominant group that comes in, and so then that older group moves out, and so there you see these successive um, demographics in this model. But this is also a model based on bid rent curve, which needs to be in your notes for the Burgess model. And bid rent curve is an important concept for AP Human Geo. And the idea is that the closer that you move towards the city center, the higher the rent. So in the urban center is where the highest rent is going to be. We see that like with Denver. And then the farther out from Denver, like out in Golden, that's going to be cheaper land than closer to the city center. So it will also impact where you build, because heavy industrial manufacturing that needs a lot of space, you can't afford the rent in the city center. So you're going to have to do it out in the concentric zones. So high volume retail is going to be in the center. Again, we've talked about central place theory. So high threshold or high order goods are going to be in the central business district, and then further out are going to be your warehousing, your residential, or even like if we analyze Denver, a lot of the pot warehouses are way out here, and then here is where high volume retail is. All right, what are the benefits of analyzing and applying this concentric zone model to our cities in the United States? It definitely reflects historical movement, so please write that down. The pattern can still be seen today, like you can definitely analyze Denver or even Philadelphia with a concentric zone model. All cities have a CBD, and this is very similar to Van Thunen. What is a drawback? Drawbacks is this is definitely based on Chicago, and this is not necessarily representing what's called gentrification as upper and middle classes move back towards the urban center, which right now is really popular to live like in downtown Denver. It doesn't represent that's now the esteemed place to be, the hip place to be, and it's driving up property value. And it doesn't necessarily reflect, let me look back here, our different transportation patterns lately that now are creating more of a peripheral access out there in the suburbs. But for most of the East Coast, we can analyze them for concentric zone. So we attribute that to Burgess, Burgess in the 1920s. This is 1939 Hoyt, Hoyt. So the next model that you would apply, this one is definitely based on the automobile. So Hoyt noticed that cities, as they increasingly got access to an automobile or to railroads, started to develop with sectors. And the sectors were definitely tied to transportation zones. So your wedges that radiated from the CBD or the central business district started to align neighborhoods that were fashionable. These are nice neighborhoods that would be organized in the most exclusive regions. And there often would be like a transportation divide. So, like, think about a highway that would divide one neighborhood from another. Like, and this is where we start to get that term on the other side of the tracks or in the hood. So when you start to have this development and this infrastructure of either railways from the railroad or from highways, and they would lock in neighborhoods, and there would start to be high income neighborhoods and low income neighborhoods, and they developed like sectors. So here's your central business district, and you may have a sector that is light manufacturing. Near there would be the low class residential that worked those factories. But then far away from that residential would be neighborhoods that have the rent of a high price, high property value zone, which would be super exclusive. So this would be the most exclusive residential. Middle class would be near there, kind of upward mobility, hoping to get into that sector. So again, Denver, parts of Denver also seem to fit the sector model. If you think of the northern part of Denver, this Highlands area, that used to be more of a low class residential near light manufacturing. And lately it's become middle class, if not most exclusive. Like the property value has shot that property value up. Again, where is heavy residential? Nowhere near where people want to live. So again, kind of on the outskirts. But Hoyt noticed that the way that cities were developing definitely was based on property value. And so in his analysis, he saw some positives and some negatives, but definitely this is a sector model based on class and the amount of money that you have to live where you want. Like if you have money for high class or middle class or the low class. So, what are the benefits of that? We still see these patterns today. These cities would be like St. Louis. You could see the development here in Denver. You might be able to analyze this in Dallas. It shows ethnic variations. When we look at where there are different neighborhoods, this might be the Hispanic neighborhood. This might be the white Caucasian neighborhood. This might be the African American neighborhood. So this is a model that definitely starts to show demographic patterns. And what is a drawback is it's very simplified. It doesn't necessarily account for innovations in transportation that allow us to build a highway around. And it is limited to almost a little too simplified for how cities have evolved. But those would be the drawbacks. So the next urban model, this one, and I almost feel like we're moving across the United States. So if we go back to the concentric zone, these were cities that were on the East Coast. The sector models are definitely states and capital cities that were more like central United States. And then by the time we're on the West Coast, if we think about the timeline of the United States development and industrial development, by the time we have the automobile, then that is how the multiple nuclei model develops. So the multiple nuclei model is definitely post-World War II. The two geographers that helped develop this are called Harris, Harris, and Ullman. Again, when we talked about the gravity model, that was Ullman, Ullman. And these are our urban sprawl cities that are very associated with Western the United States, Seattle, Los Angeles, even Denver, that we have the automobile that allows for transportation hubs and allows you to access the central business district and changes the way residential cities are aligned. So in this multiple nuclei model, the central business district no longer is the total core for all business, that you actually can move business to nodes, N-O-D-E. And when those nodes become more fortified, they actually become edge cities. So think about Denver. Denver has Denver Central Business District, but it also has down in the south the tech center. And that as that tech center has grown, that's become the node. Maybe your parents actually have commutes all the way down to southern Denver for the Denver Tech Center. And that actually becomes an edge city. And so Centennial, for instance, wasn't even a city in the 1980s. When I first moved to Colorado, there was no such thing as Centennial, Colorado. But over time, because that edge city developed with transportation, with industry, with business services, it became a city outright. And it's changed in sprawl the way the city develops. So here you have the central business district, you have light manufacturing, you have, again, the lower class residential that service the industries there. But you start to have the sprawl of middle class or exclusive residential that have the access of a vehicle of transportation to use the highway system to come in to where they need to work. Heavy industrial or industrial parks can be zoned into certain tech areas. And this has become very much the Western model for cities. This is what you saw when you were analyzing Eagle, Idaho. And what are the benefits of analyzing this model? Well, it takes into account this very decentralized structure of Western North American cities. And the car, the just urban vehicles have helped allow for the sprawl. Las Vegas is very much based on this model. The drawbacks is that there would be equal weight given to all nodes, and that's not necessarily true. It's not like the tech center has as much gravity as the central business district of Denver. But it is contributing to urban sprawl. If you were to take this theory and include a viaduct all the way around, like Houston, and include a highway system that almost is like a concentric ring around, then that's what's called the peripheral model, which I would like you to put in your notes just somewhere off to the margin. A peripheral model is where you have a highway system that loops all the way around so that you can access all of the zones with a highway right around. So Houston has added that concentric highway around to allow you access. All right, let me pause. So after your three models, you have two more note pieces of what is urban sprawl and what are the advantages and disadvantages to new urbanism. So to address urban sprawl is very much what we're living in the Louisville area. When you look out at the Broomfield sprawl as that Buffalo Run area has developed, that's defined as low density leapfrog developments beyond the urban edge. And there are services that are added, but there's not a lot of coordinated planning. It's kind of a hodgepodge of urban growth, but it's definitely dependent on cars, that cars help connect you to these different urban nodes. And then for the next is what is new urbanism? So Highlands Ranch is an example of new urbanism. It's also called gentrification, as in the gentry have provided money and helped kind of bump up with their cash these places to make them more viable and more attractive to move back in. This revitalization of the suburban neighborhoods are trying to make them more like walkable, like you can access them with foot, that there's diversity of housing and jobs, but they're planned communities. They're not always open to diversity because you need a certain amount of money to move into these neighborhoods. Like down here by Coors Field, to live in the lofts and the urban environment that are right down near Coors, you need to be making just hundreds of thousands of dollars just to afford that rent. So the gentrification starts to make kind of a class-based neighborhood. And so in their attempt to revitalize these neighborhoods, they do push out urban poor. So the advantage is they revitalize the neighborhoods. The downside is they push out people who can't afford to live in these neighborhood zones. I think that's it. All right, it's not it, because I have to still address the types of cities that are not in North America. So already I gave you the concentric, the sector, and the multiple nuclei that are associated with North American cities. But I need to address, for the rest of your notes, the types of city models that develop outside of North America. So this is called the Latin American model. And the Latin American model, what you'll notice is that in the central business district, there's this elite residential sector that develop along like one major transportation hub. And this would be the most exclusive fancy housing right here. And then right in here, this is the zone of like the market and the industrial zone. But then out here, all along the edge, on the outer parts of the city, are what's called the squatter settlements or the peripheral zone. And disamenity means that there's actually parts of the city that do not have access to city services like fire and police and health services. Like disamenity means you're getting none of that. So super, super poor and not even with access to your basic needs. So there seems to almost be like a huddling of the elite residential and the people with money right near this main transportation hub. In that main transportation hub, this would be like where there would be like market vendors, and these poor people would come in to sell their wares along this market spine. And this would be where the wealthy people would align. This would be where the industrial light business would be happening. And then this would be what is called the favela, Favela. The favela means like a slum along the edge. This particular model is called the Ford, FORD model, and it's associated with Latin American cities. Okay, and then for the rest of these diagrams that I've included in your notes, this is just to show the impact of colonialism, and especially white colonialism, on other parts of the world that influenced the way that their cities developed. So for this one, we're looking at the design of an African city. And these African cities, because they were taken over by white Europeans, the white Europeans would create zones where the low-income neighborhoods would have direct access to the industrial warehouses, but the upper income and would be in a different part of the city, and the military would be in a different part of the city. And that these different designations would often be based on race. So you would have the upper income that would be like white, and then these low income would be black, being able to access the cities. And this was very much imposed with colonial rule on these cities. If I look at the next one here, for an apartheid city, so like for in South Africa, because the Dutch took that separatism to an extreme, they had exactly and enforced with military on where could the white people live. Here's white, white, white. And then where could African communities live? And they separated African communities, kind of a divide and conquer. They would separate them by ethnic um, uh, configuration. They would divide with military these zones, and there wasn't allowed for, like here you would allow for a little mixing, but not here. And so it was very prescribed on who lives where, physical barriers involved and buffer zones so that certain groups couldn't interact. Here you can see that they had an Indian zone that was in between the two darker colored zones. And so this was all very prescribed to keep people apart, and then it allowed for control from the white colonialists. And then I have two more, I guess, here. In this Islamic city design, what's interesting here is that you've got genders separated as far as access to the markets, that there are places that only men can go, there are places that only women can go, that it's definitely organized around the mosques, which are the religious temples. They have markets that are kind of a central hub where people sell their wares. And there's no gentrification because it is really more historical as this has grown over time. It's been kind of, each group has superimposed over each neighborhood because of religious significance. But interesting that the genders are separated as far as access to the cities. And then there's one more city design. I think I had here an Asian city. I don't know if I have that available in your notes here. Again, is influenced with colonial rule. And in that Asian city, let me see, I've got to go back a little part farther here. Do I have one more? No. Yeah. This one in the Asian city, you have a central business district, but then over time there maybe is one part of the city that is really more influenced with Europeans that increasingly are making their business presence there. Out in the suburbs, excuse me, would be where wealthy and more middle class residents are. And then you have more of the people of color designated to another part of the city. And it's very much organized around the port and where that seaport is. And so the Europeans almost have like reinforcement the closer they are to the port or the city to allow for kind of some backup, since they're infiltrating a place that's very different and new. And then the native area would be where it's more overcrowded and unsanitary. So I think that's like what I needed to give you for city models. So if you would please upload your notes to Schoology. You guys rock. Thanks for hanging with me. Bye.